Welcome to Impressions Magazine's Ask the Experts podcast and video series, where we talk to veteran professionals from across the decorated apparel industry about the technologies and techniques they've used to help make their own businesses a success. In this episode, we'll be speaking with Charlie Taublieb, a veteran screen printer who, in addition to being a popular Impressions Expo presenter, is also the principal of Taublieb Consulting and the author of the newly published Screen Printer's Handbook and Survival Guide, available in both a print version and online. In our conversation, Charlie and I will be discussing some of the issues, questions screen printers should keep in mind when purchasing and working with some of the many accessories involved in screen printing, things like screen exposure units, flash units, and conveyor dryers. And with that, let's go ahead and check in with Charlie. So, Charlie, it's great to have you with us, and thanks for joining us again on Ask the Experts.
Adam, it's wonderful to be here and look forward to getting this going.
Absolutely, me too. So yeah, you and I spoke a little not too long ago about actual screen printing presses, autos, manuals, the things that make for good ones, successful ones. But I'm thinking, and I've been thinking since then, that there's a lot more to it than just presses. You can have the greatest press in the world, but you also need the right accessories, the accessories that work for a particular shop in order to be commercially viable, in order to get the prints that you want. Is that a fair assessment?
That is, and probably the number one piece of equipment that everybody looks at is that flash unit, because of the type of work that everybody does have to do. And the flash unit has become a staple. You can't really function without it, although back when I started, they didn't have a flash unit yet. In any event, there are a number of different types on the market. There are quartz, there are infrared. Manually, generally, you're going to find that most manual presses are infrared. On an automatic, they're generally quartz, although they do have infrared for, they can go both ways. The reason that most manuals won't go with a quartz is because the cost is quite high. They're very fast, faster than most people can print manually. The biggest thing with a flash unit is to make sure that it's doing its job correctly. So on an automatic, it usually fits right into the press. On a manual, I think the biggest thing is having a proper stand so that your flash doesn't dip in the front and come high in the back, where you're burning the shirt on one end and you're not gelling the ink on the other end. So when I put a shop together, I make sure to go with a heavy duty system as opposed to a very inexpensive system made up of a bunch of pipes.
Sure.
Other accessories that I think are really important.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'd like to, if you don't mind, I'd like to dig into flash units a little bit more, because that's one of those things that, to me, there are a lot of variables involved, and just so, especially those who are new to screen printing, for example, a flash unit is crucial because basically what you're doing here is you're laying down plastic, right? And this isn't going to dry like your finger paint or something back in elementary school. You actually need to cure. And you need the chemistry to work, and that requires heat. Am I right about that?
Yes, it does. And it's curing is probably not the correct term. It's I forget the term off. It'll come to me as I speak, but we call it curing. And in fact, it's a situation where you're actually bonding the ink together. In any event, what we're doing is we're printing layers of plastic. And so in order to get the type of effect that we want, we'd like to do it without flashing too often, but at the same time, depending on the work, you do have to flash. The faster you can flash, the more you can produce, obviously. Mm-hmm. It also has to be strong enough to get through the layers. And part of that is knowing the positive and negatives of a particular flash. So quartz flashes are made up of bulbs. They're very hot where the bulb is. In between bulbs are not as hot. So you can definitely end up with a burn situation. On an automatic, that's generally not an issue. On a manual, it does become an issue sometimes. Infrared is not as fast, but the wattage is definitely important. And that's part of why you see a difference in price. Even though the size of a unit may seem to be the same, the wattage is not. And the higher the wattage, the faster it can go.
Interesting.
There are automatic flashes for a manual, where they can either swing the head or they're triggered by motion. I'm somewhat of a fan of the ones that are triggered by motion. I'm not a big fan of the ones that move unless you're doing a lot of athletic printing where you're constantly flashing.
Right.
In any event, the ones on automatics generally work with a motion detector, although they don't have to. You can also have a program depending on whose press you have.
Interesting.
Really important piece. I think a lot of companies underbuy on some of the flashes. They look at price more than performance. And I think that's true with a lot of equipment. Price is definitely a factor, no question about it, but performance is definitely the bigger issue.
Is this somewhat analogous, would you say, maybe to heat press units? You can get less expensive heat presses that look an awful lot like high quality heat presses, especially those manufactured here, domestically. But if you want even heat, if you want predictable heat, if you want constant heat over time, is that something that you're going to get that? You're going to get better heating elements, whether it's infrared or quartz. You're going to get a better heating element and heat control if you pay a little bit more.
And control is definitely the whole deal as far as I'm concerned. If you can't control your variables, then you have no idea what you're going to get as a finished product. Yeah. And just because something looks good doesn't make it good. I remember the old commercial where it looks just like a BMW. Well, it may look like it, but it isn't. And I think when you're talking about transfer machines or flash units or anything else, just because they paint them up and make them look pretty and make them look like somebody else's doesn't make it function the way somebody else's does. And performance is definitely what you're paying for. The difference in price over a period of time becomes unimportant if you're getting the proper performance.
Sure. Interesting. And it will save you money, right? You in the
long run, when a machine, not only performance but also reliability. Presses don't break down, machines don't break down when you're not using them. So when you're using them, that you have to really rely on them, and that's when, of course, things go wrong or could go wrong, and so that's part of what you're paying for.
Real quick question: flash units, are they available in both 110 and 220, or exclusively one or the other, or how does that work?
Not only 110.
That's a factor for especially home shops, right?
Yeah, 110 is what the general manual printer is going to use. 220, some on manuals and on automatics, just because they're more efficient. And then you also have overseas where they're on 330 and 440.
Right.
So, of course, we don't have to deal with that here, but overseas they do.
Right.
That wattage is really the critical thing. And so you do pay a bit more for a 220 line. The thing is, if you're a home situation, working out of your house, chances of having 220 line are pretty slim.
Right.
So you're probably going to go with a 110 situation. The size of a flash is the other thing. You want a flash that can handle t-shirts, but also if you have to do leg prints and stuff, you may want something that actually is a little bit longer as opposed to a 1616. You may want an 1824, something that can really cover a bigger area should you need it. Some of the newer flashes that I saw are individually controlled on an automatic in terms of quartz, where you can shut off very specific bulbs so that if you're not using them, you're not burning up a lot of electricity.
I would imagine that's kind of a bigger shop, larger production runs. We're talking.
Without a doubt. Yeah. As soon as you're into automatics, you're definitely into bigger shops. Even if it's a small shop, it's not small.
But even if you're just starting out in decorating, you've got I don't know what, like a 6-station manual or something. Don't think you can skimp on your flash unit. This is something that's going to be critical to successful decorating, quite frankly. And it sounds like it'll save you money, time, effort, hassle.
The 3 items that I tell everyone is they need to spend their money on: press, a flash, and a dryer. And if you can't buy the best, buy the cheapest thing that you can get away with, so that when you have enough money, you can turn around, get rid of that, and buy the best. When you buy something in the middle, you're stuck. You spend too much to dump it, and you're not getting the performance you really need to make the money that you need to.
Interesting. I'm chuckling, Charlie, because that was a brilliant segue into the next one: conveyor dryers.
Okay.
To the end guy, they're all boxes with a belt running through them. But I'm guessing that stable temperatures, control, reliability. So yes, perfect dryers.
what's interesting is almost any dryer has a hot side and a cold side, whether it's manual, small electric one or a gas fired one. So one of the ways of testing that is getting an Atkins temperature probe. And so as you send your probe through, you can profile your dryer to see which is the hot side, which is the cold side. And the downside is it's going to run about $350 for that probe. If you know someone that has one, you can certainly borrow it. Automatic shops should absolutely spend the money on it, just because it's that much more critical to them. Manual shops can certainly get away with less. But when you talk about dryers, the thing about, we'll talk about manuals first. You don't, in general, a lot of the dryers geared to a manual are quite large, or in the past they were generally 24-inch wide, 10 feet long, burned up a lot of electricity. And so I'm more of a fan of getting a smaller dryer. That being said, I want something that has a wide enough belt so I can drop a shirt on without having to carefully fold it. So there are a lot of 18-inch wide belts on 6-foot dryers. The problem is it takes longer to put the shirt down than it does to print the shirt. So I'm a fan of at least 24 inches, 30 inches would be ideal. I don't need to have it very long. I just need it to be efficient. And so the length, if you're growing, the length becomes more of a concern. Some of the newer dryers on the market are expandable. So you can add on more heat elements, you can add on more belt, you can add on more in-feed, out-feed, etc. There are some deals on the old dryers in terms of price, but you're going to burn up a lot of electricity. And if you're like where I live, our electric bill is almost doubled in a year. Power company just went ballistic, and so it does become a concern. Without a doubt,
where like you don't want to be penny wise, pound foolish, go with the used unit, and next thing you know, your bills are going to eat up any savings you might have had.
Right. You picked up this dryer for $1,500, and now you look at your electric bill and it's gone ballistic.
Yeah. But it sounds like, and I guess when you were talking about belt width, that's one of those things where, especially again, getting back to beginners in the industry, people who are working at home in their garage, they might think, oh, I want to go with the smallest unit possible. But in fact, size matters. If you're in the middle of a production run and every single time you put that shirt down, you have to place it carefully. That's a lot of extra effort, isn't it, for a decent production run?
It is. Not only place it carefully, but generally you're not going fast enough. So you're standing there with a wet shirt waiting for enough belt space.
Yes.
And so aside from having to lay it down very carefully to make sure that your whole image area is exposed to the heat, you're just not moving fast enough. So it does need to have some power. And without a doubt, this is another one of those cases where the amount of wattage per element is a critical thing. And that's part of what you pay for. You look at two dryers that are identical visually, and you realize one of them has a lot more juice to it than the other. And so that's why the difference in price. That being said, when you get to automatics, without a doubt, gas-fired is far more efficient, far more controllable than an electric. Electric has a big swing in terms of peaks and valleys, where gas does not have that much of a swing. The downside on gas dryers for someone small is the size. I don't think there's anything less than a 36-inch, 15-foot gas dryer. And the cost of that versus a 48-inch, 20-foot gas dryer, very little difference in them, because what you're paying for all of the components that go into that gas dryer. But that being said, there are people who will buy an electric dryer for using their automatic. The only time I think that makes any sense is if it's going to cost you so much to pull gas into your place, or you have to go with a unit where you have to bury the tank and you're working off of that unit. And there are parts of the country where that is the case. In general, though, I would go with a gas-fired dryer if I had the opportunity to do that.
If you're making that jump from a manual, it's another factor to keep in mind. If your shop is growing, your business is growing, and you're thinking of autos, you're going to want to think that it's going to be part of the cost, really, to take full advantage, I'd say, of that auto. You're also going to look at a new dryer.
Yep. And I think a lot of people don't realize there are a handful of things. Jumping from a manual to an automatic is not simply just the press. It's the press, it's the dryer, it's the compressor in general, unless it's all electric. And then there are other components that they don't think into, and it drives me crazy. Squeegee sharpeners. You should be sharpening a squeegee every 10,000 impressions, which sounds like a lot. On an automatic, that could be inside of a week. And so I'm always puzzled why a salesperson, you're selling somebody a $100,000 package. Do you really think that the $1,500 for a squeegee sharpener is going to blow the deal?
Well, I'll tell you what, Charlie. I think we're going to have reconvene at some point and go into the screens and squeegees in serious depth here, because I know from your book, we'll give you a plug there. I know you talk about it there. I do. We're unfortunately, as we're running out of time, we like to keep these short. One quick, I might be getting myself in. Maybe we're going to burn up a bunch of time, but one more thing I want to touch on real quick, since we've been talking a lot of electricity, heat, light. Flashy or screen exposure units. Obviously, that is a big part of the process. Any tips? Is that something where they all kind of look very similar? Thoughts on that, especially for say newcomer business.
So let me go to the negative side. A lot of screen printers, when they first come in, buy or build a fluorescent system. Problem with fluorescent systems, they are multi-point light sources that are very slow. And so the quality that you can get is good on day one, but a month or 2 months down the road, not so much. They look very similar to some of the other units on the market, but they are not the same. The unit of choice used to be a metal halide lamp, which I'm still a big fan of. It's a single point light source, very powerful, does need 220 dedicated line. But it gives you great exposures. The unit that everyone is moving over to and has moved over to are LED systems. And the reason they have is a number of reasons. Number one, it's just a 110, just plug it right into the wall, doesn't need a dedicated line. They are lightning fast. The slowest of them are lightning fast. And the fastest of them are almost too fast, to the point where a second in one direction or the other could be underexposed or overexposed. Cost on a LED system is not a whole lot more than a fluorescent system, and could be less than a metal halide lamp. So for those looking for the deal, try and find a used metal halide lamp. The downside is the cost of the bulb is anywhere from $350 to $550 on metal halide. And those bulbs are probably good for between 1 and 200 working hours before you should be changing them. The thing about LED is it's constant. So once you have your exposure worked out, you don't have to redo anything. They say it's good for 50,000 to 100,000 hours, which is kind of a fallacy. That doesn't mean that the bulbs won't blow out. So if you look at the strips periodically, you should open up your system and hit the button to see if any of the little bulbs have gone out. If enough of them gone out, it's time to change the strip. I just had one of my clients change hers, but she went 7 years without having to do anything. So the $1,500 or whatever it was that she had to pay for new strips was a bargain as far as she was concerned, versus metal halide, where she would have had to change the bulbs many times over.
Yeah, LEDs are pretty amazing little bits of technology. And I would imagine, I'm guessing the LEDs require a lot less energy, a lot less electricity.
Very next to nothing. That's why you can just plug them into the wall. Your electric bill will not take a hit. What was interesting, I had a client of mine in Denver go from a metal halide lamp to a LED system. Decent sized shop, a number of automatics. They found that when they went over to an LED system, their electric bill dropped about $300 for the month.
Wow. So
depending on
it was money well spent, right? It's going to pay for itself pretty quick.
And it did. It paid for itself in about 1.5 years.
Outstanding.
So there's definitely a very positive outlook there.
Good. Well, I'll tell you what, Charlie. Again, it's funny. Once you and I start gabbing, I feel like the time flies by. We're definitely gonna. Because I know on my list, I wanted to talk washout booths with you. We're not going to have time, but I know that's something that you feel.
Let me give you 2 seconds on that.
All right, 2 seconds. 2 seconds. Yeah.
All right. You're going to get a washout booth. It needs to have backlighting. If
Okay.
you're going to build your own, it needs to have backlighting. Period.
All right. All right, outstanding. Well, and on that, dear listeners, you're just gonna have to wait for us to dig into this in depth. So, but again, I guess kind of to sum things up, again, you could the press isn't all of it. Spend, like you were saying, either spend the money on these accessories, good ones, or buy junk so that you're ready to throw it out, right? And then you can upgrade to where you should have been all along. Is that kind of a
absolutely that's definitely my attitude.
Excellent. All right. Well, Charlie, again, the time literally flies when we start gabbing. So again, thank you very much for this. And with any luck, I suspect we will be talking again soon.
Look forward to it. Thanks so much for having me on.
All right. Well, that wraps up our conversation with veteran screen printer, Charlie. All right. Well, that wraps up our conversation with veteran screen printer, Charlie Taublieb, principal of Taublieb Consulting. For those interested in contacting Charlie directly, go to taubliebconsulting.com. That's TAUBLIEB consulting.com. For those interested in learning more about Impressions Magazine and the thrice annual Impressions Expo trade shows held in Fort Worth, Texas, Long Beach, California, and Atlantic City, New Jersey, go to impressionsmagazine.com. For now, though, thanks for joining us and keep on decorating.